En mis ojos está la memoria de la verdadera Latinoamérica. Latinoamérica del saqueo de las materias primas, regímenes caídos, corrupción política y catástrofe social. Latinoamérica de la selva que se muere por codicia. Comunidades indígenas destruidas, niños que mueren por millones cada día. Niños hambrientos, madres llorando, familias de luto. Para enriquecer no solo a bancos y corporaciones, sino a un muy pequeño grupo de personas que no saben o no les importa. A veces quisiera poder olvidar a esos hermanos, a esas hermanas y sus miradas, bombas atómicas de pobreza que he visto en el sur. Acá en el norte, esas personas son solo números que muy pocos ven y que no salen en ninguna parte en las computadoras de Wall Street.
Escasez de palomas que asesinaron al anciano que
The American dream. There's a reason they call it a dream. Who's there? Cock-a-doodle-doo, pal. No, 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 no! I don't have any more money! My job sucks right now, please! I'll have more money next month! You can't take my house!
Is that your signature?
Oh, okay, well, just help me work something out, okay? I mean, you said I'm a good credit guy, right? I mean, hey, wait! My dog is in there! No, don't take my dream!
Así como el protagonista de esta historia de dibujos animados llamada El sueño americano, mira cómo los bancos y la policía se llevan a su sueño americano, en este caso personificado por su perrito. Así, millones de personas se vieron despojados de sus casas o sus ahorros. Desde que la burbuja del mercado de casas explotó, desnudando la falta de liquidez para respaldar el supuesto capital de las grandes empresas. Desde los grandes bancos a las grandes aseguradoras, de repente, todos se vieron sin efectivo suficiente para respaldar las pérdidas. En otras palabras, el sistema estaba operando en bancarrota. Cuando el gobierno intervino para salvar la economía, lo hizo porque en realidad el sistema económico de Occidente estuvo a punto de colapsar. El riesgo es la sangre misma del sistema económico actual. Esto no es una declaración subjetiva, sino una realidad concebida en la arquitectura misma del sistema. En otras palabras, dentro del sistema de reserva fraccional, los bancos, corporaciones y demás instituciones financieras operan con un respaldo real del 10% del capital que dicen tener, a veces menos. Este respaldo no es en oro ni en petróleo como lo fue hasta hace algunos años. El respaldo es en promesas de pago de deudas y poderío político-militar. Al final el gobierno intervino, pero no para poner restricciones al sector financiero, ni corregir la falla estructural del sistema económico. El gobierno intervino para salvar a los demasiado grandes para caer, como fueron conocidos. Es decir, no solo salvó a los bancos, sino que lo hizo en formas que estos ganaron mucho dinero. Y no solo eso, sino que al hacerlo endeudó y condicionó el desarrollo y bienestar de la sociedad en su conjunto. Es algo como lo que acá llaman socializa las pérdidas y privatiza las ganancias. Pero ¿quiénes son estos demasiado grandes para caer? Recuerden que según los principios del capitalismo clásico, el que cae, cae, y nadie lo salva. Así que si 2 gobiernos y 3 congresos toleraron esta contradicción, sin mencionar el comportamiento ilegal de estos demasiado grandes para caer, esto quiere decir que deben ser muy importantes y muy bien conectados. En este reportaje estudiaremos a la estructura del poder financiero y para esto les presento el libro La criatura de Jekyll Island, escrito por Edward J. Griffin. En este libro se describe un complot para tomarse la totalidad de la economía estadounidense, supuestamente llevado a cabo e implementado por un grupo de poderosas casas bancarias americanas y europeas al inicio del siglo pasado. Para entrevistar a tan notable autor viajé hasta Los Ángeles, California.
To describe the real nature of the banking system, it's a big topic, isn't it? What is the real nature of something as complicated as the banking system in the United States and in the world, because now the world has pretty much followed that pattern. You can make it very complex, but if you were to boil it down to its essence, I would start by saying, first, it's not what it appears to be. It appears to be a profession. It appears to be a commercial enterprise. It appears to be a financial institution, but it's none of the above. It's really, and I hope your viewers are ready for this, it's really a cartel, a banking cartel. It's no different than an oil cartel, banana cartel, sugar cartel, happens to be a banking cartel. And that's kind of shocking when you find the truth of it. And the point is, it's a private bank. And they've gone into partnership with the government. The government has given them, by law, given them the authority and the power to create the nation's money. It's an amazing arrangement once you dig into it and find out what it really is. And in the United States, it's a group of banks, the largest banks. And they formed a cartel back in 1913 when the Federal Reserve Act was passed into law, which means that they agreed to cooperate with each other and no longer compete. And they decided that since the American public was very interested in passing a new law that was going to control the power of the banks, they decided that better than letting the government do that, letting the people do that, they would do it themselves. And so that's the reason that they got together very secretly back in 1910, which was 3 years before the passage of the law. Very secretly, the leaders of these big banks got together and they got on a railroad a private railroad car of Senator Nelson Aldrich at the time, and they traveled for 2 nights and a day back to Georgia, to Brunswick, Georgia, got off the train, took a ferry boat across the inland straits to an island called Jekyll Island. And that's the reason when I wrote my book I called it The Creature from Jekyll Island, because it's a real island. And that's where they went. And they went there because it was privately owned and it was away from the prying eyes of the newspaper reporters and the politicians and so forth. And they spent a week there. And it was privately owned, as I said, but it was who owned it? It was owned by some of the wealthiest people in the world. It was owned by a group of families, J.P. Morgan, William Rockefeller, and their business associates. Their families all had mansions there, and they called it the Jekyll Island Club. It was a social island, is where they went to get away from the cold winter months. They lived up in New York, of course. So that's where they went, and they spent a week there. And they hammered out all the details of what became the Federal Reserve Act.
But the bankers, greedy for more power and wealth, were concocting their most ambitious plan yet to once and for all take control of the finances of the United States. In 1910, a secret meeting was held at the J.P. Morgan estate on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. This meeting was so secretive, so concealed from government and public knowledge that the 10 attendees used code names.
I am clearly the richest man, so I should be the one to run the super-secret central bank. I own all the oil in America. I'm clearly richer than you will ever be, hula girl. I should run the super-secret central bank. You're nothing compared to me, lube job. I shall run the secret bank.
Silence!
Supreme Master Leader, I didn't know you were gonna be here.
I'm not. Neither are you, dumbass.
Oh yeah, right. He's so smart.
None of you shall run the bank. We have failed in the past because of openness. This time, the key to success is secrecy. The people must believe that they run the bank.
Yes, brilliant! A sneak attack. What's the plan?
We first create panic, then we show them the solution. With our man in office and well-planned timing, we will have our central bank. And so the people think it is theirs. We shall christen it Federal. The Federal Reserve.
The reason that we did the character, the Supreme Master Leader that way, and we used that Red Shield concept, was we're representing an idea and a philosophical viewpoint. And you're right, the faces do change, the names can change, they shuffle around, and that's not really that's the magic trick. That's not really where the real action's at. The real action's at when you hear this philosophical viewpoint and you hear that people want to do these things. That's what you need to stand up and fight, not who says it, because who will always continue to change, and that's why we need to believe in philosophies and ideas.
Dos veces antes habían intentado crear un banco central privado como los bancos centrales europeos, e incluso a costa de sangre, los norteamericanos habían resistido hasta entonces la influencia y a veces el ataque de los poderosos grupos de capital privado europeos.
December 23rd, 1913. When most of our Congress were at home eating fruitcake, these bastards, I mean bankers, presented their treasonous act to their newly elected accomplice, Woodrow Wilson, who had fortuitously already agreed to sign it before he was even elected.
En 1913, con la firma del Acta de la Fed, el Estado le cedió el poder económico a un banco central privado, quien desde entonces vende dinero al país. Sí, lo escucharon bien, vende dinero. Cobra impuestos a sus ciudadanos y controla la política económica y el dinero a través de las tasas de interés en el dólar. Es decir, literalmente es una máquina de transformar papel en oro. El problema es que ese papel vale menos cada vez que se imprimen más billetes. Esto se conoce como la inflación. En otras palabras, cada vez tu dinero compra menos y tu riqueza y la de todos en el sistema económico se transfiere a aquellos que controlan la impresión de ese dinero.
The people have no idea. But the bankers bragged about what they did to us, laughing at us all the way to the bank.
Why, it's the best business I've ever done. If I can control a nation's wealth, I cannot who makes its laws.
And basically all they did is they created an agreement how to regulate their own industry. They set up the rules to their advantage, of course, because they were writing it. And then they sent it back through their contacts to Washington, and they had it enacted into law. They called it the Federal Reserve Act. But when you read the Federal Reserve Act, you find out it's nothing more or less than a cartel agreement. And so to answer the question, we find out that the Federal Reserve System is a cartel. given the power of creating the nation's money. And there are virtually no restrictions. They can do whatever they want to do. And they always make it sound like they're doing it in the best interest of the people. And of course, you find that in every country. The politicians and the bankers never do anything outwardly for their own benefit. Of course, they're always big humanitarians, and so they're always doing it for the people, you know. But once you understand that it is a cartel, and you understand that all cartels have one purpose, and that's to promote the advantage of the members of the cartel, period, then you understand that what's happening here in the United States, in the banking industry, and in the economy, every time you turn around and there are another billion or trillion dollars being created out of nothing and being put into some kind of a so-called stimulus program, or it's a bailout program of some kind, if you analyze it, you find out, where does the money go? Well, it goes to the banks, doesn't it? It goes to the banks, first of all. They're getting trillions of dollars of taxpayers' money. And what doesn't go directly to the banks goes indirectly to the banks, because then it goes to the corporations that are in debt to the banks. The big companies that have so much debt that they can't possibly pay it off. They can't continue to make those interest payments anymore. So then the government passes a law, and the Federal Reserve creates the money out of nothing, and they give it to the corporations as a loan, supposedly. And then the corporations can continue paying the interest to the banks. So when you follow the paths, it always winds up back at the banks. And many people are surprised at that. And the reason they're surprised is because they don't realize that the Federal Reserve System is a cartel, a banking cartel. Once they understood that, well, then it would all make sense.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
What's happening? Where am I? I believe perhaps you understand now, pal, but you are afraid. JFK. Hartman, what does this have to do with my house and my dog? Oh, okay, that's enough. I want to go home now. This is the last president to stand up to the Fed. You must see. On June 4, 1963, President Kennedy signed Executive Order 11110. This executive order empowered the U.S. Treasury to issue real money without the Fed. It would have worked. Kennedy's plan to dismantle the Federal Reserve machine had begun. But 6 months later, John F. Kennedy went to Dallas and never returned. No way. No way they could do that. The new president, Lyndon Johnson, threw out Kennedy's order. And since JFK, no president has dared confront the secret powers behind the Federal Reserve.
En todo caso, de acuerdo a la información no verificada debido al silencio que rodea la relación de poder entre la Fed y el gobierno, ya que el Banco de la Reserva Federal no puede ser auditado por nadie, ni siquiera el Congreso norteamericano. Es posible que estos bancos sean parte de los dueños del Banco de la Reserva Federal. Es muy posible que esta lista sea cierta. Después de todo, estamos hablando de muchos de los bancos más poderosos del mundo. Estos bancos son dueños de las corporaciones civiles y militares más grandes, así como de muchas de las tierras y acuíferos más importantes de nuestro planeta. A través de privatizaciones, cobros de deudas y compras de compañías competidoras, algunos bancos y grupos de capital poco a poco se están apropiando del mundo, exactamente tal y como lo dice el libro La criatura de la isla de Jekyll. Pero según muchos, el sistema de dominación va mucho más allá de Estados Unidos y alcanza una escala global. Es decir, la Fed es el Banco Central de Estados Unidos, pero no es el único caso. El Banco de Inglaterra, el Banco de Japón, el Banco Central Europeo, todos estos son bancos privados que controlan la economía de sus regiones de influencia. Estos bancos centrales no solo muy posiblemente pertenecen a los mismos grupos de capital, sino que a su vez tienen un mega banco central que los regula y coordina. El Banco de Pagos Internacionales o Bank of International Settlements no rinde cuentas a ningún gobierno, y su real valor neto e influencia así como sus dueños, son desconocidos. De acuerdo a Griffin y a muchos otros, si el Banco de la Reserva Federal es la herramienta de la élite bancaria para controlar la economía de Estados Unidos, el Banco de Pagos Internacionales es la herramienta para controlar a todo el mundo. A quien le quede una duda de que actualmente el poder económico domina al poder político y a las sociedades, piense en los cortes de salud y educación en todo el mundo, para cubrir las pérdidas de megacorporaciones que de todas formas tienen más capital y valor que países enteros. Para que se den una idea, piensen que en el 2004 las 500 corporaciones más grandes valían 60.8 trillones de dólares. En comparación, la producción total del resto del mundo, o Producto Mundial Bruto, ese año fue de 14.8 trillones. Es decir, todo el resto del planeta ganó casi 4 veces menos que las corporaciones más grandes. Esto ilustra la desconcertante realidad de que actualmente las corporaciones y bancos transnacionales tienen más poder e influencia que las sociedades y sus gobiernos. Por lo menos en la película del sueño americano, al final, los protagonistas tienen la oportunidad de enfrentar al mal cara a
Parasites had
cara.
us vastly outnumbered, but their hubris made them weak. Not like us. Not like this band of immortals we have assembled. We have come to take back our...
Hardman? Is that?
my dog.
Oh,
Then the inevitable. The Money Kings could ignore us no longer. They sent an emissary, a cog in their machine of greed to bring about our submission. Hank Paulson.
Hardman, this is blasphemy. We own the corners of the earth. It is futile to challenge us. Madman. You're a madman. We're offering you everything. What do you think this is? This is America!
So we chose our main character, basically. We chose Pyle as our main character. The model for our movie is that Pyle was America, was the average guy who's just wants to live the American dream and have his dog and have his house. And, you know, in the beginning of the film, we purposefully made everything all pink and blue and pastel. And it's a dream world. There was no, you didn't have to deal with all the realities that were going on. And when finally the reckoning of reality comes in and he loses everything, then, you know, we brought in sort of the Ghost of Christmas Past element of having Hartman come into his life and show him, no, all is not lost. It's just you have to live within the confines of reality. And actually, if you're willing to, that will make you freer than you ever were before. And so that's what we're kind of trying to show people is yeah, it's hard to be free, but it's better. And we just need to have the bravery, okay, because Pyle is kind of, I mean, he's afraid to do it. He's a coward. He's afraid of all the bad things that can happen. But once he steps up and just says, I'm going to take it on, give me liberty or give me death. Once he stands up and does that, that's what sets him free and turns him into a warrior, you know? And that's what America's got to do.
En nuestro próximo capítulo compartiremos la experiencia de aquellos que decidieron luchar y se tomaron Wall Street, demandando un cambio. No te lo pierdas. Desde el gigante del norte para el pueblo latino a través de Telesur, yo soy Oscar León, el reportero del sur.